Now, this morning, I want to invite us into a thought. This is one of my thoughts. There's no scientific research behind this, and you can debate on it. You can find different words for it, but I at least just want to use this to tee us up this morning. And it's this idea of a overvalue, undervalue paradox. The overvalue, undervalue paradox. Now, when you think about your own life and you think about value, the value that you have, the value that others have, the value that you feel, the value that you don't feel, oftentimes what happens is in our own lives, we are people who tend to, the pendulum swing of life that most of us do in all areas, we tend to overvalue ourselves or we tend to undervalue ourselves. And we don't make conscious decisions around that. Even thinking about emotionally focused in 2 days. Like there's things in our life that we've had experiences that we've made meanings from, that we've committed to live from. And oftentimes what that is a way of trying to overvalue ourselves and undervalue ourselves. And if you're new to church, if you're new to faith, if you've kind of been watching from the outside and trying to figure out Jesus and the Bible and Christianity, you might know this in a way of, and maybe experienced in a way, someone who overvalues their value. And what we could tend to talk about there, we would call self-righteousness. So someone who is so overvaluing themselves that what starts to happen very quickly is that they become above others in their life. And many people who are on the outside of faith and outside of the church have this happen to them, and it makes them question, hold on, if you're a self-righteous person, you have it all put together, and you see me as not having it put together, they start to look at the entire faith through the lens of that person. The other side of it is that we can tend to undervalue ourselves. We can tend to undervalue. We can actually feel as if we do not have something to offer. We do not have worth. We do not have dignity. And a lot of times these are both seen from existential lenses. If I am trying to navigate a hard relationship, if it comes down to my socioeconomics and my finance, it comes down to my relationship status, it comes down to my jobs, it comes down to who else can do something better than I can tend to undervalue. But ultimately it starts here. It's an intrinsic piece that works itself outward. And overvalue very quickly turns into self-righteousness. Undervalue turns into unrighteousness. I am not, I have not, I can not. And I hold that up for us this morning to consider what side are we on. For me, I tend to lean towards the overvalue and the self-righteous. And what that starts to sound like is I have a way of thinking, of viewing, of believing, of doing that in my mind is just about the best way possible. Like very quickly, and then what happens is because someone else has something different, well, because I have the best way, then they must have a lesser way. If I have the right way, they must have the wrong way. This gets really bad, and this is probably why you have boundaries in your own family where you don't talk about two things at Thanksgiving or Christmas: politics and religion. Right? And all of a sudden, when we start to overvalue the way that we understand something and see something, it actually starts to become the thing that we turn other people into enemies, that they don't have it. And then we need to change them and fix them. And the other side, depending on where we're at, is the undervalue, or called unrighteousness, where we actually pull away from most of life. We pull away from most people. We start to detach ourselves from the things that are hard, the things that God might be calling us to, because we don't actually feel like we have enough value to contribute. And then what we start to see is a church who fluctuates between people who have it all together or are trying to fix everybody else, and others who tend to just kind of drift through and maybe go with the flow of the water that day. Where do you find yourself? Do you lean towards overvaluing? Do you lean towards undervaluing? And I think this matters much, especially for us as a church. And what we want to do over the next 3 Sundays, Lila and I, is actually just journey through Luke 15. And we have very popular parables in which Jesus is actually communicating something very significant in who we are, who God values, and how God values, and what it means for us to be people that are whole, that have worth, that have self-value, that have integrity, that have something to contribute, that have something meaningful and purposeful to live for in our lives. And it's through the lens of the lost and the found. And each parable builds on itself. They're all connected a little bit, so we're trying to pull them apart and find maybe some distinct meanings. But ultimately, what we see is a God who loves us and a God who will go at great lengths. Now, I don't know about you, when we look through a self-righteous lens or an unrighteous lens, it's actually harder to see what God is not only doing in my life, it's also harder to see what God is doing in the lives of others. And even right now, when we start to be confronted by what we believe, what we see, how we make decisions, what we think about certain things, it can feel very challenging when other people think and believe differently. You know the people in your mind that they need to change. They need to get it right. If they could only see this way. We can just kind of keep going down the list. And it wasn't unique. It's not just unique to us. This is also Jesus' situation. So it starts like this. Luke 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Now, if you've been in church at any point, you've probably gone through these parables. You've heard them at least, have a basic idea of a lost sheep, a lost coin, and a lost son. And what I want to do is slow us down a bit and maybe try to read this through a new lens, because we are trying to understand something that was written about 2,000 years ago. I have a hard time understanding someone that wrote something 30 years ago. And so how do we actually move backwards a little bit to see what's going on? I'm going to read something. You're going to have to use your ears here, not visual. But I think this helps kind of set the table for what's actually happening when the religious leaders of the time are confronting the way Jesus is behaving and who he's actually hanging out with. The tax collectors and the sinners. The issue of table fellowship was critical for each party. But worst of all, from the Pharisees' point of view, was the fact that Jesus not only ate with sinners, tax collectors were also at his table. So you have sinners, you have those that are far off from God, those that are outside of a Jewish context. But then you have these tax collectors, the ones who had actually gone against their own people to work for a Roman Empire. Back then, you might get in trouble by your parents, but then you could easily just say, well, at least I'm not a tax collector. That's how bad they were, at least perceived. Tax collectors were religiously defiled by contact with Gentiles, but there was more. Only one who has been privileged to be a party of community living under military occupation can fully understand the feelings of such a community toward the collaborator, Jesus. French collaborators at the time of the Nazi occupation were bitterly represented and after the war killed or imprisoned. In South Africa, collaborators have been burned to death with rubber tires and gasoline. In Jerusalem, during the winter of 1990, Israel Shahak of Jerusalem, a Warsaw Ghetto survivor, told of the butchering of Jewish collaborators by Jews before the fall of the ghetto. Palestinians on the West Bank during the uprising have also executed collaborators. All of this is a tragic and yet understandable response of an oppressed people in their community reacting to those who are cooperating with their oppressors. In like manner, during the ministry of Jesus, the land was ruled by hated Roman conquerors. Thus, the Pharisaic objection to Jesus' table fellowship with tax collectors was both religious and political. The conclusion of the matter is that for both Jesus and for the Pharisees, table fellowship, or lack of it, was a critical symbol of identity. It is little wonder that a confrontation on the issue occurred. The Pharisees and scribes appear with an accusation against Jesus. This man eats with tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus will go on to do Luke 15 here in a second, but we must realize what he doesn't do. He doesn't appease to the religious leaders, just say, guys, look, I know. I'm trying to create space for those that are, below you. And look, what's equal to my mercy is my judgment. So trust me, I'll be hard with them also. They do need to get cleaned up before I continue to, eat at the table with them. You could imagine he could very quickly give in to what was popular. But we actually will read here in a few minutes, he does the complete opposite. He holds to the commitment and the conviction that he has come to seek and to save the lost. Kenneth Bailey writes this, on the other hand, for Jesus, the matter of table fellowship was also critical. Jeremias, an early writer, notes, the inclusion of sinners in the community of salvation, achieved in table fellowship, is the most meaningful expression of the message of the redeeming love of God. This is actually one of the greatest images communicating the lengths and the depths to which God will go to love you and to love me and to love that person who you most despise, who you most don't agree with, who you most wish was not the way that they were. Jesus has come to seek and to save the lost. It continues, then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? So if we actually translate into Aramaic language, what you would say back then is you would actually say the words, my sheep has gone from me. My sheep has left. My sheep has gone away. And by so doing in that language, you're actually putting responsibility on the thing that is lost. And these Pharisees standing there being confronted by Jesus would understand that very quickly, that a shepherd would put it on the sheep. That dumb sheep has gone from me. I must now figure out a way to get it. And so when he says this instantly, what he's putting in front of them is this idea that he, who has been trying to communicate that he is also God, as he says, he leaves, he goes, he finds. He actually replaces the responsibility, the ownership of the shepherd to do the work of going, of leaving, and of finding. So very quickly, you and I would be standing there, confront, what does he mean he is going to go? Isn't this the dumb sheep, the one that wandered off, the one that could not stay with the rest of the flock? I wonder if for us this morning we could consider that something's value can be determined by the pursuit of the person who values it. That you and I, if we actually want to consider our value, not to overvalue or to undervalue, but if we consider the value of our life, of ourselves, can we first and foremost consider the pursuit that God has for us? Because isn't it when you lose something, you could lose 2 items, and very quickly you'll be displaying their significance or their value to you by which one you go looking for first, and at which lengths you will go to find that item, that thing, that person. The value of whatever you've lost is determined by the pursuit that you will put into it. How much more is your and I's value determined by the pursuit of God for us? Now, if you think about a sheep, each sheep, you've never actually found, let's call it a wild flock of sheep. Because there is no thing that sheep do to actually stay together. They actually need a shepherd. Because they are actually quite dumb. The thing that sheep do best is they just graze. Like they just put their head down and they eat grass. And the shepherd has to go to this side, be like, hey guys, this way, and come over here, and then do the dog thing over there, and as they just graze. Head down, no awareness, will literally walk off of a cliff as long as grass is on the edge. And so as we think about the sheep that have wandered off, I wonder if for you and I, a helpful thing to consider this morning is, where do we tend to wander? Where do we tend without like really realizing it? Where do we tend to wander to go find value? Where are you most finding value right now? And usually we can realize what we value most when someone contradicts it, or we lose it, or the thing that we were working towards didn't happen or come through. But where are you wandering these past few weeks? Where are you finding value? Or where are you not finding value? Where are you overvaluing? Where are you undervaluing? Where are we just going about with our head down, eating up the things that we think define us and give us value? And when he finds it, the lost sheep, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. If you've ever seen it, I love the little image of Jesus with like a light glowing behind him, and he has a staff, and he's just carrying this little like baby lamb all casually, like one-armed. I mean, I guess he probably could. He was probably strong. I don't know. Human yet divine. Like you could look normal, but like have like that extra dad strength type stuff, like very deceiving. And it's just very small image of this little sheep. But if we actually think about it, you're going out into the wilderness, over the hills, through the caves, on top of rocks, potentially fending off any type of bear, lion, cougar that is wanting to eat that one lost sheep. You must go and wrangle it. And what you're talking about is a 60, 70, 80 pound animal that you must leave 99 of them behind to go get one. Like how quickly I think it would be much easier just to go get another sheep. Like you're just like, well, I don't know, that one's either going to find another flock or it's going to get eaten or whatever. I'm not going to spend the amount of time it's going to take to go find this thing where I have no idea where it is and risk something else happening to the 99. The great cost and the great lengths of pursuing the one sheep, the one that has wandered off. And then to do the work of lugging this thing up that has already made you walk farther than you ever have. You've gotten scraped on the rock that you weren't planning on slipping on. You literally had to fight something. Like you're so frustrated. All you want to do is strangle the sheep when you show up. It's like, why did you do this? Why have you wandered so far away? Why have you chosen that path and the one that I've offered you? I will make you pay for wandering off. But what a shepherd does is he finds the lost, bleating sheep. The little noise that I can't do well. It's just sitting there pathetic and scared under a rock. It's fine, trying to find some form of refuge, and the shepherd walks and it grabs it and it puts the sheep up on his shoulders and begins the journey all the way back home to bring the sheep home. And I wonder for us this morning who live in a Western culture that most value is dictated on what we can or cannot do, what we have or do not have. I wonder if we consider the pursuit of God in the image of this word for the sheep, the pursuit of God to our own lives, the greatest lengths that he would go to. I wonder if we pause to consider that this morning. However far you've gone, wherever you're at now, wherever you're trying to find value, wherever you don't see or sense any value, that God is one who will not give up, and he does not come with hands ready to strangle. He comes with broad shoulders to lift you up, to put you on, and to walk you all the way home, to return, to have a sense of value and of worth and of dignity. And I think he starts to broaden this idea of what it means to be found. that it actually has nothing to do with what you can or cannot do. It has much less to do with what you do or do not. It has much to do with, can you allow God to put you on his shoulders? Can you allow the shepherd to carry you, to bring you back, to direct your path? We see a much broader sense of, I must do this and that for God to love me, to have value in me. I think it's the pursuit of God that places the value inside of us. And then he does this. This is like, I feel like just like rubbing it into the Pharisees at this point. He's communicated quite a bit to them as they mutter begrudgingly of Jesus hanging out with all these tax collectors and sinners. So he does all that, and then when the sheep comes home, he calls his friends and his neighbors together and says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep. I mean, this isn't just like a big deal that he just returns to the flock. Like, it was such a big deal because he's actually able to bring it all the way home, that he wants to call other people. And there's two things happening here. One, that a shepherd's dignity in the village and his ability to actually work to an honorable place is, can he keep his flock together? So actually, the lostness or the foundness of the sheep does play, and it gives to the imagery of who the shepherd is or is not. And throughout the scriptures, we see a God who has said that I'm saving, I'm redeeming, I'm restoring for my sake, so that more will actually see who I actually am. That God actually has interest in pursuing you for, yes, himself, not in some selfish gain, but because of his goodness and his mercy and his grace and his love for people can actually be communicated for more to find mercy and grace and love. God actually wants to be portrayed as a God who is a good shepherd, to lift others up, to draw us near. And then two, he's also communicating the value of that sheep. There's two things happening, and may we actually celebrate. So now, position to the Pharisees, as you stand here begrudgingly and you mutter, when what I'm trying to do right now is actually throw a party. And you stand from the outsides and you look at what I'm doing, hanging out with those that you despise, those that you cannot touch, those that you cannot eat with, because your religion has gone so far beyond the relationship that I've ever had for you and others. Do we find ourselves on the side of self-righteousness this morning? Is there anybody who you would stand on the outside and maybe not step into the party if they were to find God? Well, yeah, because that's not the right God. Well, yeah, they think that it has to do with that, but that's not who God is. I mean, I can keep going on the list of what I think sometimes and how I can make these ideas up of who has and has not been found. Or maybe we feel so undervalued that we can't actually celebrate the good things that God is doing in other people's lives because it hurts. Because it hurts us, because our value, we undervalue ourselves. And we don't actually know how to celebrate the things that God is doing in and through other people's lives and to partner with him in it. As he goes on to say this, I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Again, now a knife wound to the Pharisees. You think you're great because you're there with all the 99 and the one that has wandered off. You think you're safe. You think you have it all figured out. You think you have it together. Yet I tell you right now that there's no rejoicing in heaven because 99 are together. There's a rejoicing in heaven when the one is found. And again, yet you stand over here begrudgingly muttering that I am hanging out with those that you despise. A thought for us this morning. The good and moral person is lost despite their goodness. Meaning you can be great and you can also be lost. You can be good and you can also be lost. But we can still be alienated from God because of our goodness. That we can think that we're so good and that we have the right view and we have everything figured out and we're doing all this stuff. And that can actually keep us from a deepening relationship with a God who is pursuing us when we wander off. And it can really keep us from seeing the work that he is doing in the lives around us. Is it our goodness that's dictating our value with God? Is it our lack of goodness that's dictating our value from God? Because see, I think when we know our inherent value, we can celebrate the inherent value in others. Like you and I. When we can actually take on the pursuit that God has for us, the lengths at which he will go to love us, everything that he will do to draw us in, the patience that he portrays over and over and over again. When we can actually receive that we have been made with value, we have dignity, we have worth, we can then from that place celebrate the inherent value in other people's lives. Do you like this room right now, say there is 75, 80 people, like if we right now, if this whole group of people walked out with just inherent value everywhere that we went, do you imagine the attractiveness of that? Like people look at you and be like, wow, man, you're just like really centered and grounded and non-anxious, and you're actually not angry at me even though I said that thing. And it seems like you actually treat those people over there with like the same amount of value when they're like that though. And how do you not, like if you just play that, imagine like your workplace, if like a handful of people just lived with like this deep sense of inherent value. Your boss would be like, what's happening right now? You guys aren't like bickering and fighting and doing that thing and trying to like fight for, who's going to get the next promotion and who's going to like stab to get it. And just imagine like how the world changes when you and I live from a place of value. And that value is one, which says God is pursuing you and I and every single other person. Imagine that. No matter what you do or don't do, no matter what you do walking from here, what you do in this next week or what you don't do. That there's a God continually after you pursuing you saying, this is the direction I'm bringing my sheep. Stay with us. I want to guide you towards life and connection and wholeness and value. Could you imagine if we were that place? And this is what I love. Man, Romans 5:8 is so powerful. While we celebrate baptism in a couple weeks, but God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That while we were far off, even when we were the one out there outside of the 99, God, in the pursuit of us, he sends his son to die for us, which is the imagery of him navigating the mountains and the hills as we lay out there under the rock thinking that we actually had it figured out, whatever direction we were going in. And it was even in that midst of while we were far off, before we were even home, that there's a God who has sacrificed for us. One last thing. I'm going to invite the worship team up, actually. This piece right here. In Luke 15, this is the part that I struggle with also. Because what can happen is in our Western modern day culture and just kind of where we're at in a cultural context of Christianity and different things, and I think this is for good reason, we can really see lost or lostness as a very negative term. It's like, whoa, we can't call other people lost because then that means like I'm found and that means I'm, overvalued. Or they're undervalued, or we kind of do this thing. And I think that's okay. Because again, if we don't get it right, we become the self-righteous or the unrighteous. And unfortunately, like bad Christians can happen to good people, and then it gets all wonky, and now we're all unrighteous and trying to do things. But if we can imagine for a second that God isn't looking at us and everyone else as either bad or good, he's looking at us as lost and found. And here's why that matters. So the word for lost or lostness used here, if we actually go back to the Greek and we look at the verb, apolumi. You guys say apolumi? Apolumi. Kind of like an apology, but you say it wrong. Apolumi. 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 You know where else this is found? Very famous verse, John 3:16. For God so loved the world, help me, I'm not going to remember it, that he gave his one and only son, will not perish. Will not perish, but will have eternal life. Perish. Apolumi. Will not be lost. that he has actually sent himself into this world, not so that they will not perish, not that they'll go into some imagery of a fiery hell or whatever your end times theology is, I don't know, and frankly, I pretty much don't care. He ultimately is right now saying that what it means to have value is to both be lost and to be found. It's not good or bad. It's lost and found, and they both have value. And what we want to do is we want to be a people that on both sides, we want to celebrate the fact that I can be found over and over again because I tend to wander. And that everyone else around me in the same way is being found. So that not that we won't be punished, so that we will not be lost, that we'll have a true north, that we'll have a good shepherd that cares for us and loves us, that will point us in the direction. So I wonder this morning, with this imagery behind me, I want you to choose a side. Is it you this morning that needs to be found? Is there an area in which you've wandered from the value that God has placed on you? Where you're trying to seek value, where you're trying to gain value? Is it in your career? Is it in your habits? Is it in the image that you hope other people have of you? Is it to vie for control and safety and comfort? Where are you wandering from the graces of a good shepherd who's guiding you to a place of purpose and meaning? What area of your life do you just need to be picked up, put on his shoulders, and brought home? And then last one, why don't we do this while standing? If you would like to stand with me. Who is it? Or who are the type of people in which it's very hard for you to imagine celebrating them being found? Where are you like the Pharisees this morning? Looking out, seeing sinners and tax collectors and just imagining, there's no hope for them. Who are those people? The groups of people. And where might you need to be confronted this morning to be reminded that God's value is just as high for them because his pursuit is just as great for them? You and I, our value is determined by God's pursuit of us. May you be open to receiving a shepherd coming towards you, lifting you up, going great lengths to put you on his shoulders and to walk a great distance home. Can you allow Jesus to do that this morning? Where do you need peace? Where do you need God to remind you of your value so you don't seek it elsewhere? Where are you wandering? I'll invite us to take communion here. And what you can do with communion this morning is we grab the cracker that represent the body of Jesus that was broken for you and I, to dip it into the juice that represents the blood of Jesus that was bled for you and I, that we could actually be in a right relationship, not because of our righteousness, but because of his. Not because our over or our undervalue, but because of his. That we can be one who is carried by God. May this morning be one to return, to be reminded and be appreciative of that forgiveness. And may at communion you be met in the places in which you're seeking value, that you need to experience God's pursuit of you. And may you also be met in the places where maybe you're over or undervaluing others. And you need to be reminded of the pursuit that God has for them also. And may we enter into both, being carried by a good and gracious and kind shepherd. So may we take communion this morning, receiving the love and the forgiveness that God has for you and I. Let's sing together, and I'll come back up in a couple minutes for prayer.